Welcome back to the channel. Our lesson today is all about the Great Emu War, also called the Great Emu Cull, which was a military operation conducted by the Australian Army during the mid-1930s to control emus in Western Australia.
Have you ever heard of a war where birds were the enemy? Yes, you heard it right, birds. Specifically, emus, large, flightless, and surprisingly agile creatures native to Australia. This was the backdrop of the Emu War of 1932, an unusual chapter in Australian history. In the early 1930s, Australia was grappling with an agricultural crisis. Veterans from World War I were given farmland in Western Australia, but a combination of poor soil and the Great Depression made successful farming a Herculean task. To give farming a fighting chance, the government offered wheat subsidies, but the real trouble swooped in when thousands of emus migrated to these farmlands. These feathered marauders, attracted by the easy food, began to wreak havoc on the crops. The farmers, exasperated by these formidable pests, called upon the government for help. Little did they know that this would set the stage for a conflict as bizarre as it was unprecedented. So the stage was set for a war unlike any other, with emus as the unlikely adversaries. With crops under siege, the government decided to take an unexpected approach: military action. Yes, you heard it correctly. The Australian government, in an attempt to alleviate the plight of the struggling farmers, sent a small military force to combat the emu onslaught. Leading this unusual mission was Major GPW Meredith, who, armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition, was tasked with dealing a decisive blow to the emu population. As November of 1932 rolled in, this brave handful of soldiers embarked on a mission that was anything but mundane. As they marched into the vast expanses of the Western Australian farmlands, they were met with a surprising challenge. The emus, known for their speed and agility, were unexpectedly difficult targets. They would scatter and sprint across the fields with such rapidity that it rendered the soldiers' efforts futile. To add to the soldiers' woes, the harsh and dusty conditions of the outback played havoc with their weaponry. The Lewis machine guns, ordinarily reliable, were prone to frequent jamming, further hampering their efforts to control the emu population. Frustration grew among the ranks as it became clear that the emus were not only pests, but formidable opponents. Their swift movements and the vastness of the terrain seemed to give them an uncanny advantage over the bewildered soldiers. The emus, it seemed, were not just pests, but formidable opponents. As the days turned into weeks, it became increasingly clear that the emus were not going down without a fight. These flightless birds, infamous for their agility and speed, were proving to be a force to reckon with. The Australian outback had turned into an unlikely battlefield, where the emus were staging an unprecedented resistance against the military. Despite the soldiers' best efforts, the emus continued to thrive and ravage the wheat fields. They darted across the plains, their swift movements making it difficult for the soldiers to aim their weapons effectively. The dusty conditions of the outback didn't help either, often causing the machine guns to jam. The situation was, quite frankly, absurd. Here was a military operation, armed with machine guns and thousands of rounds of ammunition, struggling to control a flock of birds. The emus were not just surviving, they were thriving, running rings around the soldiers. It was as if they were mocking the human attempt to control them, adding an element of humor to the otherwise serious situation. The turning point came when the soldiers realized their efforts were in vain. The emus were far too agile, far too many, and far too determined to let a few machine guns stand in their way. In the face of such unexpected resistance, the Emu War was declared a failure. Just as abruptly as it had begun, the Emu War came to an end, leaving behind a legacy that continues to amuse and bemuse. In December 1932, the soldiers withdrew, their mission a clear failure. Left virtually unchecked, the emu population continued to thrive, their pursuit of sustenance uninterrupted. The war's conclusion didn't mark the end of the tale, though. The media, both in Australia and around the globe, picked up the story, spinning it into a narrative of humor and ridicule. Headlines painted a picture of a military outsmarted by a flock of birds, turning the situation into a farce that captured the public imagination. These days, the Emu War is often brought up as a symbol of government mismanagement, a stark reminder of ill-conceived plans and their unintended consequences. It also serves as a cautionary tale about human intervention in nature, a lesson in the unpredictability of wildlife and the folly of underestimating one's adversary. And so, the Emu War remains etched in history as one of the most unusual battles ever fought, reminding us of the unpredictable nature of conflicts and, of course, the tenacity of emus.